Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Dennison. I'm with peaceoptions.com. And today I'd like to speak with you about our freedom of speech, which appears to be under attack on many different fronts. Most recently being by a tweet by our President-elect Trump, who has called for an anti-flag burning law, and perhaps with penalties associated with that, ranging anywhere from jail up to loss of citizenship. I'm not here to argue in favor of Trump's efforts here. I believe that they're wrong and misguided, but I would point out the fact that the last anti-flag burning bill that was submitted to Congress was done by none other than Hillary Clinton back in 2005, where she sponsored the bill to make it illegal to burn flags. That tweet by Trump has elicited a wide range of screams from mainstream media, led by none other than CNN on the Clinton News Network, that has come out with all of their talking heads about how terrible it is that Trump would talk about stopping flag burning. The purpose of this video is not to argue the merits of flag burning or not flag burning. Flag burning at this moment is still protected speech by the Supreme Court, and those who wish to try to change that are certainly welcome to do that. But the issue is not so much about Trump's talking about the flag burning of free speech as it is the hypocrisy of those who are opposing him, who have taken up their own crusade against what they call fake news. And when you hear fake news, what you were doing is this is actually a guise for censorship by applying or calls for censorship and trying to get people to turn away from news that they don't want you to hear. Now, yes, there are stories that are made up and put on the web. There are other stories that are on the internet that are blatantly false, just by reason of the facts that somebody has given them a bad quote, or they've got their sources wrong, or they haven't connected the dots well enough, and they have drawn the wrong conclusions. So there are many reasons why there's fake information or incorrect information that comes across the news. But the internet is not the place to try to stop that through censoring the voices of those who have something to say. Now, if those voices are inciting riot or harm to do harm to others, then perhaps those voices we need to consider means of restraining those. But at the moment, I don't see that as the problem, because I'm seeing many people on the left calling for either killing Trump or taking other action against him, which is totally wrong. We've never been a nation to try to shut up the people that we didn't want to hear or that we didn't agree with by killing them, or have we? Again, in our past, we've got all kinds of things we can point to on both sides of the equation. But we are in a nation where the very First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, first of all, understand, the Bill of Rights is not part of the Constitution per se. The Bill of Rights was adopted after the Constitution, or in process at the same time the ratification of the Constitution was going on, and it was being done as a method to protect the rights of the individuals against the tyranny of the majority and a tyranny of the government. And so that the Bill of Rights exists for you and for me to have the ability to speak to each other and to speak out against the wrongs of society. The idea of free speech goes way back. Though it's commonly, and I always thought it was attributed to Voltaire, later learned to be an English lord by the name of Lord Acton, who once said, "I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." I may have misphrased the quote, but the idea is that we don't have to agree with each other, but we have to give each other the opportunity at least to be heard. We can't stop what someone is saying just because we don't want to hear it. But this is what's happening in our world, particularly our country right now. We have become intolerant of anyone whose views don't match our own. And as a result of the election, there has been a tremendous amount of pressure being applied upon Twitter and Google and Reddit and other platforms by the left to restrain the speech of those who they saw contributing to the Trump election. Now, mind you, most of these institutions or businesses were already coming out against Trump. They were taking an active role in trying to get Hillary elected. We were seeing that everywhere we turned during the election season. I mean, the whole thing about mainstream media was that they were failing to report news which was critical to Hillary, and were taking everything that was negative to Trump and just piling on and just throwing on more and more and more, talking about how bad he was. Now, is there any surprise that following the election of Trump, that those people that were listening to these rants of the so-called media experts, the now discredited and highly partisan mainstream media, and when I say mainstream media, I'm talking about broadcast and cable news. I'm talking about the big newspapers like New York Times and the Washington Post, and all the others who have jumped on the partisan bandwagon to try to push their views and suppress the views of those they opposed. I am a big believer in fairness in the process of our system. And I've practiced law for 35 years, and it is very, very clear to me that the rules that we have set up for maintaining the order within our society, whether it's within our courts, whether it's within our government, whether it's within our social structure, are in place to provide some sort of an orderly system for resolving disputes and carrying out our grievances and carrying on debate. There have been a number of instances where debate has been limited, such as you can't stand up in a crowded theater and yell fire. There was an Alfred Hitchcock movie that did that, where Paul Newman did that many, many years ago, back in the 60s. And this is, so that there are limits to free speech. But the limits to free speech don't generally extend to outright stopping other people from talking or being heard. But what has happened is that with these platforms, these commercial platforms like YouTube and Google and Twitter and Reddit and Facebook, they have rules of engagement where they can pretty much do anything they want and allow whoever to use it that they want. The freedom of speech rules that we have that apply to a government, that the government cannot enact any laws to limit our freedom of speech, do not apply to these private businesses. And these private businesses, though, are becoming the arm of government, and we saw during the election that they were being manipulated by Hillary Clinton to improve results for her and make it appear that Trump was not doing so well, which we know now is a lie. And what happens is these privateers, we'll call them, these private corporations, have now become an arm of censorship that are squelching voices primarily on the right, but sometimes on the left, that are daring to speak out against the common narratives that are being fed to us by our mainstream media, and as some believe, through the CIA or government outlets that are feeding these stories to them. For instance, after the election, we started with this whole fake news thing. And as a result of the fake news series of stories that was with a list written by a very left-leaning professor who has since been discredited and the list removed, and now the others have coming out with lists of supposedly fake news sites that are meant to supposedly protect us from those who want to subject us to ideas that we don't want to hear. So what they're doing is they want to transform their platforms into platforms that will only accept and promote certain types of speech. While it is not illegal for them to do this, it is an affront to the sensibilities of all of us who believe in free speech, because free speech means free. It doesn't mean being subjected to the whims of a censorship board or a company that controls the choke point for the news that's coming across their platform. These efforts were not just resulting, it didn't just come from their delisting and blocking sites from right-wing contributors into Twitter, many of whom shared stories from conservative publications like The Federalist and Breitbart and Trudge. Instead, just labeling the whole thing as fake news, and then anybody that was citing them or anybody who was talking about them were banned. What does that say to our nation? What does that say about us? Yesterday, this has continued. They've continued with it to the point that Reddit has taken down and censored the discussions on Pizzagate, which if you will recall, was revealed through WikiLeaks of the Podesta emails that indicated that there is potential pedophilia and satanic ritual ring using children for either as sex slaves or in child trafficking, or satanic rituals where their blood is taken and they are sacrificed to this god Moloch. Now, the Pizzagate may or may not be related to the satanic aspects of Abramovich that were shown in the Podesta WikiLeaks, but they nevertheless point to the very real possibility that there are high-level individuals, probably of both parties, that are taking part in pedophilia and child sex rings around the country. And the importance of this is that, with regard to free speech, is the Reddit completely closed down the thread that was allowing them to talk, the Pizzagate thread, so that people could no longer discuss it amongst themselves. They no longer had a platform there. Well, thankfully, the people at Reddit found another platform ready and willing to go called Vote, VOAT.com, where you can go and find the Pizzagate discussion, which is ongoing and has been reproduced there and is going to full force. But what's happening is we as citizens are finding ourselves more and more and more intolerant of listening to those that do not agree with us. And instead, the internet has been this great mechanism for us to get information, but it also allows us to have the information filtered and tailored to our specific interests. And what this does is this creates an echo chamber where all that's fed back to us is the things that we want to hear, and the things that we don't want to hear are just kind of pushed off. And when they get to the point that they're forced upon us and other people make us want to hear it, that's when they step in and they start stopping the discussion, so people don't have to have their nice little world rocked by hearing somebody's views that don't agree with them. And This is a problem that we all have to some extent or another, because we all are getting caught up in listening to and reading only the things that we want to hear and not hearing the things that we don't. I'll give you for instance, in my own situation. During the election, thanks to mainstream media, I learned about a site called Breitbart, breitbartnews.com. And actually, they're taking a lot of heat. Supposedly, they're an alt-right group that supposedly promotes stories and positions that are supposedly racist or xenophobic or anti-feminine. And yes, they do challenge some of those beliefs. They're not shy about that. But I've discovered that Breitbart gives news that you can't find anywhere else on the web. They're sometimes the only people that will say things. Another such site that has become extremely popular, at least for conservatives over the period of the election, has been the Drudge Report. And Drudge has been around for a while and is now reaping the rewards where they've become like the #3 news site on all the internet. And because they put out stories that no one else will tell. Now, if you go to just Drudge and Breitbart, you would get basically a very conservative or right-wing position or view on the events that they're discussing. But to make sure that I stay well-rounded, I'll go to Alternet or to HuffPost and read what they have to say on the same issues. So I try to get a more balanced approach. But what I'm hearing when I go to one or the other, it's like cheerleading for their side and denigrating the people that believe otherwise, and almost making fun of the people that don't think the way they do. And I'm not just talking about Breitbart. And Drudge doesn't take any opinions. They just list stories, headlines. But Breitbart is the one that primarily is being discussed in the news. Yet their information is very good. But on the same side, on the opposite side, HuffPost has taken just as far and maybe even more of an extreme, where they are calling for all kinds of things to limit speech and to limit this fake news and to censor the discussions among people. And I don't understand this. I've tried to walk this line between the two sides for many years, and it just doesn't seem to work, because when I talk about issues that are important to those on the right, such as freedom and freedom of speech and prosperity, those on the left don't want to hear it, and they attack me for whatever reason, and they'll start throwing out their name calling with no basis whatsoever. But that's the way they work. That's their MO, and we understand that. But that speech is not restricted at all. That speech is encouraged by the platforms. When I say the platforms, again, I'm referring to Twitter and Facebook and Google primarily, and Reddit and the others that are all doing their job at censorship. But it's wrong. How are we ever going to build a better world if we don't at least listen to each other? Yesterday, Trump jumped on the bandwagon, and he renewed Hillary's demand for anti-flag burning legislation to penalize those who burn the flag. And lo and behold, CNN and the rest of the mainstream media jumped all over it and started excoriating Trump for saying that. Of course, they didn't realize that the last flag-burning legislation that was proposed to the bill that was proposed to the Congress was sponsored none other by Hillary Clinton back in 2005, where she proposed an anti-flag burning bill in the Senate, which did not pass. And of course, that flag burning is a protected free speech, by the U.S. Constitution, I believe, going back to 1989. And again, I'm not suggesting changing the legislation. I'm not suggesting changing the amendment or by amendment or by rule of the court or any of that. What I'm talking about is the willingness of people to shut other people up and only listen to what they want to hear. And this is happening everywhere we turn. We cannot build a democracy. We cannot go forward and have a better world if we're going to keep shutting up and turning off the people that we don't want to hear. When we start screaming, sit down and shut up to those we don't agree with, we're not leaving them any choice but to be heard in more aggressive and vociferous means. And those who haven't been heard, those who have been suppressed, we are seeing what's happening in other parts of the world as it's bleeding into our country with the Islamic terrorism that's going on. These are peoples that have been suppressed and have not been permitted to be heard. And these are people that practice a religion that happens to not accept the existence of other religions and wants to enforce it upon all infidels, those who do not believe their way, by force and murder if they have to, lopping off their heads. Well, this isn't much different than what we used to see several hundred years ago with the Catholic Church. And again, the Islamic religion seems to be taking the same tactic and just running a few hundred years behind because their civilization has not been able to develop because of as rapidly because the Western influences have been suppressed and kept out. And they are just now seeping in because of the internet and because of trade and because of the fact that people now have a mobility that was never known before. Again, what they're doing in terms of how they're trying to be heard, I absolutely, totally disagree with. There is no place in this world for violence against another person, much less trying to force one's views on anyone else or rewrite the codes of our culture and our Constitution that would put in Sharia law, which is what the objective is of the Islamicists who would like to transform the entire world. And their method right now is through breeding. They immigrate into the nations where they want to take over, and then they breed their way to majority rule, and then they will impose Sharia law. That's what their stated objective is. And it's happening. Their numbers are growing. That we see what's happening in Europe. Is this to say it's right or wrong? There's no right or wrong in these cultural wars. It appears to be that to the victor go the spoils. And in this point, what we're having is a series of reverse crusades that's going on at a grassroots level as they are sending these individuals in to wreak their havoc in the civilizations of the West. This battle with terrorism, we've been fighting it for 50 years, and it looks like it's continuing to accelerate. But I don't see any way we're going to resolve it until we find a way to listen to each other and to recognize the legitimacy of other people's perspectives and views and ideas and find a way and see if we can find ways to either accommodate them or allow them to interact with our own to find some way where we all can go forward together. This starts with freedom of speech. We have to be able to be heard. If platforms like Twitter and Facebook cannot allow free speech to take place, and instead they are censoring the speech and deciding that some can be heard and some cannot be heard, regardless of what they're saying or who is saying it and which side they're on. If they are taking this tactic of doing this, then these platforms are doomed to fail, because you would have a responsibility to recognize this censorship and go to a platform where you would not be censored. There are such platforms forming right now. Gab is one of them, G-A-B. I think it's .io, but I'm not sure about the extension. But it is a new platform, and you can go in and try that out and set yourself up an account. And I would suspect that it's going to start siphoning a large number of people off of Twitter as people take their conversations elsewhere where they don't have to, where they don't have to worry about oppression or suppression of their free speech. As I indicated before, the Reddit Pizzagate discussion was taken off of Reddit, and it was moved to another new platform called Voat, VOAT.com, where you can go to listen to read all the Pizzagate stuff, so you can stay up to date on the child molesting and pedophilia allegations that were raised in WikiLeaks and elsewhere. But ultimately, it all comes down to us. Whether we are willing to stay on and participate in platforms and in areas where our speech is under threat of attack at any moment because people don't like what we have to say. I don't always like what I hear from people that don't agree with me on Twitter. There are a lot of trolls out there that have a lot of nasty things to say. And believe me, they need to be addressed. But we need a proper way to do this. Then it's not by stopping the free speech. I mean, Twitter has tools that allow you to block that kind of speech. But now Twitter's trying to block it before you ever get that chance. And to those who run Twitter, I will tell you, you're already in trouble financially. Your company is shrinking, and you haven't found ways to monetize it to keep growing. And I know you're trying to sell it, but you're going to find your value is going to go down and down and down if you do not restore the free speech ability of all sides, not just those who agree with you or those you support. Freedom of speech is a right which is important to each of us. Take these demonstrations, the protests that came after Trump was elected. I understand their frustration. I understand their anger. They've been fed such a bunch of lies from the mainstream media. There's no way that they could ever see this guy as anything other than the way they have painted him. And they're taking every little thing and they're projecting out upon all their wildest concerns to a point that they're totally in fear of him. Maybe there's something to fear. It doesn't mean that you don't remain vigilant. That doesn't mean that you don't speak out. And they spoke out. They went out in the streets and they marched and spoke with their feet, with their actions. Some went overboard. Some started rioting, like what happened out in Portland. That's wrong. But the right to speak, the right to protest, the right to say what's on your mind and not be held accountable criminally for it is a fundamental principle of our nation. Just yesterday, they just buried Fidel Castro, who was being held up by the left as being this great figure for creating equality and justice and this wonderful healthcare system in Cuba. But what they don't talk about is Fidel Castro was not elected. He came in at the point of a gun in a revolution, and he is a revolution with the revolution of the proletariat. They took away all the property of everyone within their country. They nationalized it, and the government owns everything. They took it from large landowners, small landowners, businesses, everything. But worse, he threw everybody in jail. They have, for 50 years, Castro, or longer, 60 years, Castro has been jailing dissidents for anyone who would dare to even speak out against their country, against Castro or his regime. This is not something to be idolized, people. You want your world to be a better world, you have to encourage people to speak up, even if you don't want to hear them. And if you have a government like that won't allow it, that's the worst thing. I mean, we're not dealing with our government coming down on it. This isn't like Obama coming down and saying, okay, no, you guys can't talk about these subjects anymore. This isn't like Trump coming in and saying, okay, I'm going to shut down all the newspapers and I'm going to shut down everything else so you can't get this information. No, it's simply a matter that it's happening surreptitiously through surrogates. Sometimes the pressure is applied by the government, sometimes the pressure is applied by rich donors, sometimes it's applied by these very vocal groups that have been set up to act as the PC police and watchdogs of all things left. This isn't the way we're going to get to a world that's going to serve us all. We need to increase free speech. We have to be heard. We have to allow others to be heard. I want to hear you. I like to read both sides of the equation. I don't want to just hear one view. I don't think you want to hear just one view. But the internet gives us this echo chamber where it just keeps feeding back the same stuff we want to hear. Somehow we have to find a way to break out of this. And worse, or even more than that, we have to find a way to stop this assault on our personal freedom of speech that is occurring at the hands of these gatekeepers that are trying to control what we say to each other and who can say what. It's wrong, and it's got to stop. That's what I think. Tell me what you think. My name's John Dennison. You can hear more about my work at peaceoptions.com. God bless you indeed. Go with love.